I shall never forget that day. I walked into Arco Base Camp. It was 1976. Standing at the door was Mr. Jim Lawler, one of the personnel people with Atlantic Richfield. And he said, Lindsey, Chaplain Williams, would you like to see something exciting today? I said, Jim, I'm always in for excitement. He said, come on, hop in the pickup truck. He said, I want to take you out to West Dock. That's where the big flotilla came in every year. As we rode along, he explained to me, he said, we've drilled into Gull Island oil field. He said, we are going to release some oil today. Check the chemical analysis. We know the depth of the field. Here are the perforations of the pipe. And he explained all of these details to me as we rode along. And when we arrived at West Dock, we sat there for a moment or two, and all of a sudden a big plume of smoke went up into the sky. That's back in the days when they still allowed them to burn off. And he said, Lindsey, look at that. This is marvelous. He said, let's head back to base camp. I want to see what's coming in from out at the well site. We arrived back at Mr. Ken Fromm's office upon the second floor of Atlantic Richfield's building. As I walked into the room that day, I could hardly believe what I was seeing. I until this day wonder how I was ever allowed in that room. Here was 8 of the top oil company men of the world, the elite of all of the oil companies, and they were standing around a big table watching what was coming in from out at the well site, and they were excited. I've never seen oil company people so excited in my life. And finally, Mr. Ken Fromm, senior executive with Atlantic Richfield, looked over at me, and he said, Chaplain, we've just done it. I said, Ken, you've just done what? He said, Lindsey, we have just drilled into and proven the largest pool of oil in North America and probably the largest pool of oil on the face of the earth. He said it should be headlines in every newspaper across America tomorrow. America energy independent. We don't need any more Arab oil. We've got everything we want on our own soil. We can supply for America. Believe you me, I went back to my dorm room that night excited. I could hardly wait the next morning to get up and go back to Arco's base camp when Wien Airlines' first flight came in with the Anchorage newspapers, and I expected to see the headlines on the top of the newspaper, huge new oil find, America energy independent. That morning I arrived early at base camp. I'd hardly gotten in the door good. The security guard caught me and said, Chaplain, go upstairs to Mr. Ken Fromm's office and sit down. Don't you dare talk to anybody. I said, what's wrong? What have I done? He said, it doesn't matter. Don't you even talk to me. You go up there and sit down. A few moments, Mr. Ken Fromm walked in, closed the door, walked around the desk, looked at me and said, Chaplain, I think I'd be a little careful if I were you about what you say about what you saw yesterday. He said, that oil field has just been ordered classified. There will be no oil released any time soon. My book, The Energy Non-Crisis, first edition came out. It was 1980. Just after it came out, I had a phone call. I've never heard an oil man so angry in my life. Ken Fromm was on the other end of the line, a career man with Atlantic Richfield, only 2 to 3 years away from retirement. He was using every language of an oil field man, and believe you me, that can be wild. And he was saying, Lindsey, Atlantic Richfield just fired me. I said, what? They can't fire you, Ken. You're the top man at Prudhoe Bay. He said they did, and he said they fired me because they found out that I was the one that let you in that room that day. He said, Lindsey, there are a few things in your book, Energy Non-Crisis, that are not lutter perfect because you're not an oil patch man. He said, I'm so mad at Atlantic Richfield. He said, I'd like to rewrite your book for you. Would you allow me? Ken Fromm and I sat down for 30 days' time. He completely rewrote my book, Energy Non-Crisis, with a new updated and enlarged edition, which I have here today, which, by the way, I'd like to give you as a gift. You did hear me correctly. I've been so concerned about America lately, I've decided to empty my warehouse. I want to give you 4 of my books today over in the exhibit hall. I'll tell you about it in a few minutes. But for right now, let me finish the story. We don't have time for greed. America is too far gone. And Ken Fromm and I sat down for 30 days. He rewrote my book, made it letter perfect. They've never, ever questioned one single word in the book because Mr. Ken Fromm himself rewrote, but he added a chapter. He added a chapter. He wrote it himself. I didn't. I could not. I didn't have the capability of writing it. He added a chapter entitled, If Gull Island Doesn't Blow Your Mind, This Will. And believe you me, it has blown the mind of the Department of Energy that it would ever be written that way. And the new edition of my book came out. I had a phone call about a month later. Who do you think was on the other end of the line? You guessed it, Mr. Ken Fromm. He said, Lindsey, Atlantic Richfield has hired me back. He said they gave me a big increase in salary. He said they've given me a large retirement. They're sending me to Houston, Texas to train all the executives that are coming to Prudhoe Bay. He said, I'm sorry, I won't be able to communicate with you too much more. They have a way of doing that, you know. My books are different. Everything I write, people asked me the other day, they said, why don't you have a glossary in your books? I said, the reason I don't is because I lived my story. I never researched someone else's materials and wrote books about them. God has allowed me the privilege of writing 6 books and having 2 bestsellers. But in every book, it's what I lived. It's my personal experience. 1984. You think they control the world? They do. 1984. I'm sorry. Yes, 1984. Ken Fromm called me on the phone one day. Remember back, it was 1977 when Ken was fired, and then he helped me rewrite my book. 1984, I was at my home in Kasilof, Alaska. The phone rang, and who do you think was on the other end of the line? You know, even the biggest men in the world, the most powerful forces in this country that control Congress and our president and the Arab world, these men are just like you and I are. They put on their breeches every morning just like I do. They still are proud and haughty and arrogant. And I'll never forget that morning in that day in 1984 when I picked up the phone and on the other end of the line was Mr. Ken Fromm. I said, Ken, I haven't heard from you for a long time. So good to have you call. I thought you couldn't talk to me anymore. He said, well, Lindsey, he said, would you like the people in your audiences for the next few months' time and the radio shows you're on, would you like them to think that you're a prophet? He knew I was a Christian. And I said, sure, Ken. What do you mean? He said, you having speaking engagements anytime soon? I said, yes. I start in Seattle, Washington next week, wind up in Southern California about 3 months later, speaking almost every night. He said, Lindsey, every place you go, you remember what oil was in 1984 per barrel? $32 a barrel, and the world thought that it could never get any higher. If it did, it would collapse the economies of the world. Oil was $32 a barrel. Ken said, Lindsey, if you'll tell your audiences everywhere that you go that oil is going to $10 a barrel. I said, you can't do that. Ken said, come on, Lindsey, get off of it. He said, you sat in our board meetings. You know who does it. I said, Ken, you can't do that. I said, the Arab sheikhs and sheiks are holding all of these people under them hostage, so to speak, by giving them everything from social medicine to education to everything imaginable. I said, you can't pull the rug out from underneath the Arab world and the rest of the oil-producing countries of the world like this. I said, Ken, you will collapse their economies. You ready for the rest of the story? You remember what gold was in 1980? $800 an ounce. 1984, Ken Fromm said, oil is going to $10 a barrel. For the next few weeks, I told that to my audiences as I spoke. Some of the audiences literally broke out laughing. They thought I was crazy. It didn't go to $10 and went to $11. They didn't quite make it to 10. Remember 1984 went to $11 a barrel. Do you know that there was a reason for doing that and that I knew the reason 3 months in advance because Mr. Ken Fromm had told me? When it went to $11 a barrel, I thought my phone was going to ring off the hook. They said, Lindsey Williams, you're a prophet. I said, no, I'm not. I know the people who are doing it because I said they have an agenda and they know everything they're doing. I had heard of a 30-year plan when I sat in their board meetings. They had a 30-year plan for the entire world, and they have carried it out meticulously, exactly as I heard them say they were going to do it.